3, 2, 1. Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
It's a pleasure for me to introduce my friend, Tony Goldwyn. Tony is an actor, producer, director, and political activist. He's been in a lot of films that form our cinematic zeitgeist, starting his screen debut in the horror film Friday the 13th in 1986, winning a Best Supporting Actor nomination for his role in the iconic film Ghost in 1990, starring as Nixon in the 95 film of the same name, acting in the Divergent film series, and most recently in King Richard in 2021, which earned him a second nomination for a SAG award. But he truly became a pop cultural icon, acting as President Fitzgerald Grant III in the ABC drama Scandal. Tony, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Sam.
So Tony, in introducing you, there's lots I didn't say, mostly because I want our listeners to hear it straight from you. What would you like to tell our audience?
Well, thanks for that nice introduction. What would I like to tell the audience? I guess an interesting thing to talk about is the kind of, you mentioned it, but the connection point of, where being a creative artist and trying to sort of build an independent business, which is what being an artist requires, with activism and realizing that I, at a certain point, had a platform that could be useful, and that was a kind of an awakening for me. So that's a more recent, sort of in the second half of my career that I start to figure out. It took some work to figure out how to do that, and I'm still figuring it out. But that's kind of an interesting, maybe less talked about thing than people sometimes ask about actors and people in our profession.
Totally. I'm glad you brought that up because I definitely want to get into that a little bit later in the episode. But in many ways, you were sort of predestined for an entertainment career with parents, grandparents,
right,
in the industry.
Yeah, that's probably also worth mentioning. My family is long, a multi-generational family on both sides in the entertainment industry.
Exactly. And so was it an easy decision to think about entering or not entering entertainment when you were getting started?
No, for me it was hard. My father's family, my father's father was one of the pioneers of the film industry of Hollywood, really. He was Sam Goldwyn was a guy who immigrated from Poland by himself at age 16, in the end of the 19th century, and scrappled his way to success, and really entered the film industry in its infancy in around 1908, I think. And
still in silent film era at that time.
Oh gosh, yes, yeah. Sound didn't come until 1929, so he was already quite, was an important guy by the time that came around. The movies were already the biggest export, I think, in American, in world culture. So that was Samuel Goldwyn, who went on to make, some classic films, and who I was very close to, even though I only knew him toward the end of his life. And then on my mother's side, her family was more from the theater in New York. Her father was a famous playwright and screenwriter named Sidney Howard. And for me personally, I fell in love with the theater. Being from a Hollywood family and growing up in Los Angeles, it was a bit overwhelming. It felt like kind of a weight on my shoulders to live up to.
I imagine.
So I wanted kind of nothing to do with it. I felt I have to figure out my own thing. But I did fall in love with theater, and then started acting in high school, and couldn't say, like any actor, it's something you can't turn away from. Because if you have any brains, you will turn away from it. So then it was more like, talking to myself, okay, I can't not do this, so how do I figure it out?
Yeah, fantastic. So I want to start with King Richard. here's a scene I particularly loved from the movie. Let's take a quick look.
There you go. All right.
Guys. Girls, come here and talk to me for a second.
Hustle, hustle, hustle.
Let me ask you about something. What do you want out of this? I know what your dad wants, but what about you?
Well, I want to win Wimbledon as many times as anyone's ever won it.
You think you can do that?
I know I can.
What about you? Who on the tour do you want to play like?
Well, I'd like other people to want to play like me.
I bet they will.
King Richard was both a powerful and a timely film in a way that some movies are able to anticipate a socio-political moment, particularly in light of Serena Williams' retirement announcement at the US Open last year. What made you want to work on that film?
Well, a few things. It was a great script and an incredible story that I didn't know the details of. I knew that Richard Williams was very involved in his daughter's career, you know, and that he was an outrageous character, but I didn't really know his story. Yeah. So when I read the script, I couldn't believe it was true. And, you know, Will is a great artist and actor and icon. And so it was, the idea of working with him was exciting. And, you know, Reynaldo Marcus Green, who directed it, I'd seen his first film that I thought was absolutely wonderful. Yeah, so it was an easy yes. I was thrilled that they asked me to do it.
Yeah. So I feel like as an actor, every project changes you in some way or leaves you with something. What was it that film left you with?
King Richard really was an affirmation of the power of family to me. And, you know, the different shapes a family can take and the way that with all of the obstacles in their way, both in terms of, Richard was a difficult dude. Yeah. But he and his wife, Brandy, you know, the way, the intensity of their involvement, intensity of their love and commitment to their kids, and the way that family kind of rallied together, all 5 girls, you know, focusing on this collective project of making Venus and Serena the 1 and 2 greatest players in history, which he predicted. For those who haven't seen the movie, Richard Williams, before they were born, wrote a manifesto about 75 or 80 pages long with a plan of how this was all going to happen. And he went to his wife and said, "This is what we're doing." And they had 2 more kids who were Venus and Serena, and they turned him, and he did it, but they together really turned them into the champions that they are. So it was the family that did it. So that was the most powerful thing for me in being a part of that film.
Yeah. Scandal turned into a foundation of pop culture in many ways. This was just one of the moments from the show that was one of my favorites.
I wanted you to see it at least once.
What is this place? Why am I here? Why the hell are we out here in the middle of nowhere?
This house is yours. Ours. I had it built for us. When it looked like there was a chance for us, I bought the land and I had it built. I couldn't really be mayor, but you can make jam. And there are bedrooms for lots of kids. This was going to be you and me raising a family and growing old together in this house.
Did you feel that Scandal was career defining for you, given the number of years that the show went on for?
I would definitely say career redefining.
Yeah.
I mean, I've had several things in my career that supposedly defined me, and then you quickly realize, oh, you have to redefine yourself with every single project. So, but yeah, it was an incredible opportunity. I never would have thought at that stage of my life or career, 50 years old, that I was going to suddenly get this amazing part, and that there would be this sort of cultural pop, this iconic show that was both incredibly entertaining and soapy, but also, got to some pretty important and timely socio-political issues, and was groundbreaking in a lot of ways. So it was amazing. I just felt very lucky to be a part of it.
What if you look back on that experience? What's the thing that sticks in your mind most as making it the kind of unique experience?
I would say two things. The people involved, we really bonded. That cast and Shonda and our writers, we became extremely close. And I had never done a television series before. I had sort of wanted to keep myself available, because you commit for at least 6 years when you do it. And I like to do other things and direct films and whatnot. So, but that just was an opportunity I couldn't pass up. So I hadn't been a part of that kind of a group for such a long period of time. So that was really profound. And then the other thing, which I sort of mentioned before, was being a part of a show that was hugely commercial and popular, like I said, from a just popcorn perspective, and fangirls and boys and whatnot, but that Shonda Rhimes, in all of her brilliance, used her nose for what the public wants, sort of what middle America wants to watch, to talk about things that she felt were really important to talk about. And being a part of that conversation felt like a real privilege.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that show was so instrumental in increasing political engagement within, a younger generation that was sort of coming of age during that time, where I think they'd felt pretty disconnected and sort of left out of politics in a sense, and didn't really understand how it impacted their lives.
Yeah, and the last political sort of White House show that had been successful was the great show, The West Wing.
Yeah.
Which was very, coming out of the Clinton years, it kind of idealized the White House was this kind of shining moral example, and Martin Sheen was this, again, heroic President Bartlett.
Totally.
And we were a whole other deal.
Yeah.
So, Shonda took the White House and poked fun at it and made it a place of scandal. And yet the people were somehow, they were all really smart and impressive, and yet all deeply flawed and awful in other ways, which was a very interesting thing in the Obama years.
Sure.
Where, the Obamas as a family were kind of unassailable.
Totally.
It's funny, you think of all of this, as successful a presidency as the Clinton presidency was, the scandals, in the Clinton White House, really the President Clinton and Monica Lewinsky and all that, I sort of felt like Aaron Sorkin was writing an alternate universe of that.
Totally.
And Scandal with the Obamas being sort of unassailable and iconic and history making as the first Black president and the first Black first family. We were, the opposite of that in a way. It was a funny mirror going, okay. And then, at the end of it, Trump came in and our whole thing got turned on its head. And in fact, Shonda was like, I can't, we have to end the show. It's like, I can't keep, its time has now passed. We need to conclude this.
Yeah.
So a year before we finished, she said, which was, we finished in 2018. So in 2017, after the first year of the Trump administration, she said, we're going to end this next year. And she made Mellie Grant president, and, we wrapped it up.
Yeah.
So it was a very interesting moment in time.
Totally.
that we were a part of.
Yeah. Fascinating. In the first film that you directed, Man on the Moon.
A Walk on the Moon, yeah.
Walk on the Moon, sorry. Was it a challenge to go from all of the acting work that you'd done to now being in the director's seat? How did you make that shift?
Yeah, it was challenging for sure. I did it really to redefine to try and gain control of my career.
Yeah.
I had this experience of being in the movie Ghost, which put me sort of on the map. I'd been working as an actor in the 6 years leading up to that, but had been able to kind of find traction. It takes a while. And suddenly I'd been thrust into this hit and a big part in this movie, and the movie was this sensational hit. And I sort of didn't know what to do with that. I thought, okay, now I guess it all happens.
Right.
And then, the next movie I did didn't make so much money, and suddenly I wasn't as hot as I was 2 years later. And I'm like, oh my God, this business is insane. How do I just felt completely out of control of things. So I thought, well,
It's like, how do you find your center through that volatility?
I didn't know, I didn't quite have in retrospect, I think now I would know better how, I have friends and many examples
Yeah.
of people who are frankly younger than me, and I watched them, how they managed their success and did it in ways much better than I did. Oh, wow. So I was a little bit lost, and I thought, okay, how do I gain control? And I thought, well, I need to kind of get a hold of material that I can control. And so the next time I'm in a hit, I then have the leverage to say, okay, this is what I want to do next. So I was looking for acting parts for myself and trying to find scripts that I could develop and be a producer on. And I fell in love with this piece of material that I did not feel was right for me as an actor, but I wanted to see it get made. So I talked to the writer, and she liked my ideas, and she said, well, would you produce this with me? So we worked on the script for about 3 years. And I did not intend to direct it. I had no desire to direct, but I became very protective over the material.
Yeah.
And as I talked to other directors, I thought, oh my God, if we've worked so hard on this, they're just going to screw it up. And one day I sort of had an epiphany, like, oh, I need to do this myself.
Yeah.
And then kind of miraculously, the financing came together, and Dustin Hoffman came on board as a producer, and his company had just started, raised some money to produce independent films. And it just fell in my lap after 3 years of hard work. And they were good with me directing it, and I did it. And not knowing if I would like it or not, I just literally did it to protect the material, and I knew it would be an interesting personal challenge. And then I fell in love with the job and the doing it. I thought, wow, I'll keep going with this.
Done it a lot since. It's getting whether it's a TV show or a film project off the ground, there's so much of a sort of the stars need to align element to it,
100%,
right? You spend 3 years developing a script.
Mm-hmm.
Some scripts see the light of day, others just don't, and
That's
sort of
right.
fade away. It's a really different dimension in the entertainment industry to kind of most things, right? To most other industries, where there's a little more predictability around sort of completion of projects. Has that gotten better over time? Does it get less uncertain with each successive project you work on because
Not for
of your
me.
wisdom and experience?
I suppose a little bit.
Yeah.
Just with experience.
Yeah.
You can't predict success.
Yeah.
Or some people can, maybe. I cannot. I guess Ryan Murphy and Shonda Rhimes can. I cannot. I get maybe I'm a little wiser. Well, I don't know. I was about to say I'm a little wiser about what I think will gain some traction in the marketplace.
Yeah.
In terms of being able to sell a project. But then again, I've had projects that I thought were absolutely brilliant with incredible actors attached to them, and they just can't. No one wants to buy them. On the other hand, when I've been a part of things that have come together, as you say, there's a kind of alchemy that happens, and all of a sudden it has momentum.
Yeah.
And I don't know why that is. The project I'm working on now is a film that I just have directed and produced, and my dear friend who wrote it has been working on this project for 12 years. And I've been working on it with him for 2. And it all of a sudden came together in a matter of 2 or 3 months. All the financing, everything, the cast, boom. It just fell in place and had this feeling of momentum, which I guess, I'm sure as an entrepreneur in any endeavor, that's the metaphysical ingredient.
Yes, exactly.
I know it is in sports. It is in any, there's this feeling of this project has traction. I don't know why, but we need to go. We need to go now. So that's the thing I'm always trying to generate, I guess.
Find and sort of figure out. I think that's such a challenge in every industry, right? And particularly as an entrepreneur, I think, as you said, it is really hard to predict success because there's so much luck, timing, alignment of people, money, all of it that needs to come together at the exact same moment for there to be this sort of minute of liftoff.
And ideas need to find their time too. I've found, because almost everything I've worked on, particularly certainly as a producer or director, have taken time. Sometimes I've been hired as a director with somebody that's already put together, and they need a director, and they'll hire me to do it. But in terms of the projects that I've nurtured and developed, they've all been a number of years gestating, and you just have to have faith. And many things I still have faith in that have not found a home or haven't sold. It doesn't mean I believe in them any less, and I'll revive things, and I go, that thing is just sticking with me, and I'm not going to let it go. So I think all entrepreneurs share that quality, that's the tenacity I think that one needs. And I think that's the biggest thing that I have learned, because there are other very successful people who may have a nose for what's hot right now and how to sell something. But often, I work with a lot of people who have sort of an ADD about it, that they will attach themselves to things that seem hot, and if they don't catch fire right away, they're on to the next thing. That's never worked for me. I'm more of a slow burner. I need to be deeply invested in something, and then I won't let it go. Because the sense for what's going to be a quick, hot thing, I've always fallen on my face when I've tried to do that. I think it's a different skill set or something. It's a different skill set. Yeah, perhaps it's a different skill set. And I guess the conviction level is very different, right, for people who are able to do that. And many of us don't have the ability to turn on a dime and attach to something without having sort of a requisite level of conviction in it. I'm sort of not interested either. On a superficial engagement with something. It just doesn't interest me. And maybe that's why, I'm not good at it. And and it wouldn't have the same satisfaction level to me, I don't think, even if I were much richer than I am. You know what I mean? If I had the ability to make a high volume of sales and do many, many more things. I don't know, the money's just not worth it to me. So what's really satisfying to me is sticking with something you really believe in, and making it, creating something.
Taking it all the way.
And then when you make money off it, that's awesome. Then you feel like, wow. But that's always, for me, a secondary benefit.
I think it is for most successful entrepreneurs, because the money comes as a side effect or as a consequence of, not when people focus on that as the primary goal. It never actually works. I don't know. Maybe it works for the Fast and Furious, but
I don't know.
For most other things.
I don't know. I mean, I guess that is a number, as you said, it's a different skill set, because that's a numbers game, I guess. If you try something, if you're a great salesperson and, you have a nose for something that could be hot in the marketplace right now, and then if it doesn't sell or doesn't catch fire, or doesn't gain traction, you move off it and you go to the next thing on your list. It's just a different
different ability.
Maybe that's not an entrepreneurial thing. Maybe as an entrepreneur, you really do need to dig in. I view sort of what I do as entrepreneurial, certainly as maybe not as much as an actor, but certainly, as a director and producer.
Are there favorite directors or actors that you've worked with that particularly stick out in your mind?
I've been so lucky. I've worked with some just brilliant people. That's the great gift for me of doing what I do. In terms of directors that I've worked with, Oliver Stone, I was very inspired by working with him on this movie about Richard Nixon that he did. I didn't have a big part, but it was just fantastic. He's a difficult guy, but a brilliant, creative mind. Another great film director who's no longer with us is Alan Bakula, who I got to work with, who I did The Pelican Brief with. And Alan was directed Sophie's Choice, and he did so many Klute and so many great films over the past. Who else? In the theater, I've worked with some incredible directors. Ivo Van Hove, who I did Network with a few years ago, and the year after that, right before the pandemic, The Inheritance, which you guys saw. Stephen Daldry, who's one of the great directors. So, yeah, I've gotten the chance to work with some amazing people. Actors, I just worked with Robert De Niro, directed him in the film that I'm just working on now, who that was, pinch yourself moment every day.
Was that the first time you'd worked with
I'd never worked with I had never met him before this project. And some of my other favorites, Sam Rockwell, who and Hilary Swank, both, who starred in my last film, Conviction, were just incredible to work with. Bryan Cranston, who I did Network with, and who I'd met, worked with 25 years ago. Gosh, a lot of amazing people. Yeah.
So many. So many. I want to shift gears a little bit. Tony, as you look back, or even today, what role do you feel coaching and mentorship has played in your career?
Well, it's played an important part, although I wish I'd had more mentors when I was younger, or had sought out more mentors. I had a very important mentor, a wonderful man who just died last year named Norman Lloyd, who died at 106 years old.
Wow.
And Norman he wasn't my godfather, but he might as well have been. Yeah. He was in the hospital when I was born. He was my parents' one of my parents' dearest friends, and was kind of the grown-up everyone adored in our household growing up. And he was an actor and a director and a producer, and a great sort of he was a member of the group theater, if you know of that, in the 1930s. He was he worked with Orson Welles. Wow. He worked with Hitchcock. He was, people might remember him in the 80s from a very popular television series called St. Elsewhere. Yeah. And he was the elderly doctor in that. And but he worked on when he was 100 years old. I think he was in Trainwreck, the Judd Apatow movie. I think that was his last movie.
Amazing.
So Norman was just an incredible character, and he was the person who I went to when I wanted to be an actor, thought I wanted to be an actor, and where my poor father was terrified at the idea. Norman said, "All right, if this is what you want to do," he was very, he helped me get my very first job in the theater at the Williamstown Theater Festival, which is a great summer theater, which is kind of where you want to start out, especially in those days. And he Blythe Danner was the lead actress up there, and he called Blythe and said, "Can you put in a word for this kid, Tony Goldwyn?" And I auditioned, and I think probably just because of Blythe, I got hired. And that was the beginning of my career. Wow. So Norman was great. And many of the actors that I met at Williamstown, who were some of the greatest actors, working in the theater in our country, I would just watch them work. So that was very.
Who were they?
Who were Blythe? A wonderful actor named Edward Herman. Who were some people that you may not know? A wonderful actor named Roberta Maxwell. There were many movie stars up there, but the people that I kind of would sit backstage and watch, were maybe actors who were more known in the theater. But I didn't. I wish that I had sought harder looked harder to find people that helped me navigate the business. My family, as I told you, was in the industry, so I had I sort of had great mentors in my father and my older brother, John, who's a couple years older than me, but was very successful a studio executive and ended up being vice chairman of Paramount, and now is a very successful film and television producer. You know, John was ahead of me and was super helpful in connecting me with people or meeting people, but there wasn't too much he could do as when I was starting out as an actor. Right. And similarly, my dad kind of wanted to take a completely hands-off approach when I started. He said, look, you're doing this, you're on your own. I can't help you. And I was like, great. I don't want any help. I want to see if I can make this my own. But when I started directing and found my feet, then my father was incredibly wise and helpful. I would literally just when I started directing, show him my work, and he would always give me really interesting notes, or I'd send him a script. So, you know, once I'd kind of gotten my, you know, foundation built and had found some success, my family and my dad and my older brother have been awesome kind of advisors. My dad's no longer with us, but early on, I felt pretty much at sea, which I guess everyone has to go through.
On your own.
So I do take mentoring myself quite seriously. Because the people that, you know, were there for me made a huge impact, and there were many times where I wish I had somebody just give me some perspective or advice in the years when I was completely didn't know how to you know, what the moves were.
Yeah, I mean, in those early days are when one needs it the most, right? Because you just know very little, feel like you have very little control or leverage, and are not even sure what muscles need to be developed and where they're going to take you. And so it feels overwhelming, almost as a blank slate in terms of how do you start even drawing the lines?
Yeah, and I had tremendous advantages with some sense of what the industry was, even though I felt very wet behind the ears and didn't know how to approach things as an actor. But, you know, I had a family that was supportive. I was not, you know, I didn't have to work 3 jobs, which most actors have to in order to, and try and figure out how to find time to audition, you know. So I had it, as hard as it felt, I know I had it much easier than most of my colleagues did, and then most people coming up. So, you know, I try and be there however I can for younger people now.
Yeah, which is such an important role to play. Your wife, Jane, has also had a super successful career in entertainment. Was it hard at times, especially during the time when your children were young, to balance both careers? Because entertainment involves being in other places that are not your home and being there for long periods of time.
Yeah, it was really challenging. It was great in one sense because Jane's a production designer, and you know, has designed some great films like, you know, at the beginning of her career, Blood Simple and Raising Arizona were the two that kind of really launched her career, which were the first two Coen brothers movies. And she did When Harry Met Sally.
I loved both those movies.
She designed Ghost, which launched my career. And she did, I've got so many over the years, more recent years, Hitch and Hustlers a couple of years ago. And, you know, she's a really great designer. But I have to say it was much harder for Jane than for me. You know, when we had kids, Jane was luckily at a point in her career where she said, I'm not traveling anymore. I'm just going to do movies in New York, which is where we live. And she was successful enough that she could pick and choose her work. I was not in that position, so I had to go on location, which was just emotionally hard. But it was very hard for Jane because when I went away, she was being a working mom, and, you know, she was still working and dealing with 2 little kids, and it was hard. But we understood each other's careers and rhythms, so we kind of hung in there, and that was incredibly valuable because I don't know how somebody who didn't understand our business would have tolerated it, you know, in either role, father or mother. And, you know, however woke we may feel, the mother seems to carry so much more of the burden.
True.
So,
Can't get away from that.
Yeah.
You've been involved with a number of nonprofit causes over the years, AmeriCares, which we share in common, the Innocence Project, as well as the Clinton presidential campaign. As a public figure and activist, how do you feel, or when do you feel you've been most effective in using your voice to raise awareness or influence an issue?
I'm most effective when I care passionately about the thing I'm talking about and have some depth of knowledge about it. And in every case, whether it's a political thing or whether it's a non-profit organization, I guess much like the projects I get involved in, I have to be sort of deeply committed to it, and it has to come from an organic, place. When I got involved with the Clinton campaign, that was the first time I really got involved in a political thing, and I really felt strongly that Hillary would make a great president, and I wanted to help. I still believe that, that she would have. And other candidates that I've been involved with, I felt similarly about. I tend to resist now just getting involved politically in a general way. I'll get involved in get out the vote initiatives, but I get asked a lot to participate in campaigns, and sometimes I'll give money, but I've sort of I find myself a little cautious.
Absolutely.
That the next time I really get involved, that it's something that I'm really passionate about and feel that I can have an impact. Just to be honest, the 2016 presidential campaign election cycle happened during the height of scandal. So I was in a position where I was very in the media because of that. And I thought, well, I can really have an impact here. Right now I'm not on a TV show, I'm doing other things. And honestly, I probably wouldn't have as much of an impact now, although I do get asked a lot. But so it's a bit of putting myself in the public sphere. I'm like, how can I really help, as opposed to just put myself out there to get attention, which I'm always a little skeptical. In terms of not-for-profits, AmeriCares obviously, was this extraordinary organization that we've both sit on the board of. That, as you know, I just got involved because I was neighbors with one of the board members and saw the work that they were doing. And Jane and I started to support AmeriCares. And the more I saw the work that they were doing and the efficiency with which they were doing that work, that humanitarian work, I just got drawn in over a number of years. The Innocence Project was a similar thing. I came to the Innocence Project through a movie that I directed and produced called Conviction, which took 10 years to get off the ground. But that was about an Innocence Project case of a wrongfully convicted person. And that turned me on to their work, and I got sort of addicted to criminal justice reform and again, saw that I could maybe be helpful.
If there was one thing that you could undo or redo over the course of your career, what would that be?
I'm inclined to say that it would be the thing that happened to me after I was in Ghost. When I'd had this first experience of real success, and at the same time I was doing a play in New York and won an Obie Award for it and was getting all this positive attention. And I sort of abdicated kind of control, I guess I would call it, or to my agents and my representatives and other people saying, okay, you guys run with the ball. I don't know how to do this. And I feel like if I'd known it had been smarter, I would have taken responsibility for myself earlier. But then I probably wouldn't have become a director, and other things wouldn't have happened, because only through struggle and falling on your face and things not working out the way you think they're supposed to, do you learn and grow and stretch yourself in other ways that are uncomfortable at first, but lead to opening whole new avenues. So, I say that, but then that was my learning curve to expand into other
And it's
things.
such a delicate balance between trusting ourselves to people who have experience and know more in the industry, and at the same time sort of having this like consistently critical lens to think about what they're suggesting or doing, and is it the right thing or does it need to be done differently. And it's very hard to do that when you're new to a career or still building your experience set, because it's sort of, who knows what the right thing is to do in the moment,
Exactly.
right?
Yeah, and the people that I was sort of assuming were going to do stuff for me were very successful,
Right.
seemingly knowledgeable people. I was just a bit naive about what their agenda was. And I don't ascribe anything negative to their agenda.
Sure.
They were in the business of making money and, seeing what was hot. And if something was less hot, then they needed to move on to what was,
Right.
the sort of the idea of a long-term, their priorities were not exactly aligned with mine. And I've learned in business, that's normal.
Yeah.
It's like in a business relationship now, and I was like, okay, well, what are Sam's needs? Like, what are her priorities? They're not the same as mine. So if we're going to have a partnership, I need to be open-eyed about what you need, and hopefully talk about it, or sometimes talking about it doesn't work either. You have to just kind of intuit it and feel it out, but know that, just because I think something serves my long-term needs doesn't necessarily mean, we have to find out where we align.
Exactly. I mean, without that alignment, it just doesn't work
Yeah. So that you only can learn that
over time.
over time. I mean, I do, I have colleagues who honestly many of whom have become huge stars, who I started out with, who had this vision about themselves. I remember being just amazed by certain people in their 20s were like, this is what I'm going to be, and this is what I'm going to do. And and I was like, really?
Yeah.
That's amazing. I mean, it seemed almost arrogant
Right.
to me at that time. And yet not all of them, some couldn't back it up with the skill, or things didn't work out for them. Many of those people who've had tremendous charisma and forceful vision of themselves, but there were some who, became big movie stars. And I was like, oh, right. They had that clarity of vision, which I just was so in awe of, but I didn't quite have that. So.
Yeah. That clarity comes at very different times.
Mm-hmm.
Any final thoughts, Tony, as we wrap up?
Well, just knowing what the idea mix is about, I think this idea of coaching and mentorship is so important, and people shouldn't be ashamed or afraid to ask for help, or feel that they're supposed to know stuff that they don't know.
Yeah.
And at any stage of life, because I have, my career I'm in constant redefinition, and I've come to a place of peace with it. No matter what success I've had, I got to roll up my sleeves the next day and start from scratch. That's just the way it is. But you can also go through a shame spiral about that. Do you know that people go through one chapter and then that chapter ends and they're like, oh my God, I'm supposed to
Be this person.
with this, and it doesn't necessarily work like that, so a lot of times we need help.
Absolutely. Such good advice. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening today. You can subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And while you're there, please do review the show. We love hearing from you. So email us at info@theideamix.com or Instagram DM us. Our episode this week was produced by the incomparable Martin Milewski, with music by the awesome Nashville-based singer-songwriter Doug Allen. You can learn more about Doug at dougallenmusic.com.